Is that you? Right, well, it's me here, and this is another Confessions podcast, so thank you for downloading us. So stand by for another episode of Terrible Tales from the Very Naughty Radio 2 listener. They like your forgiveness. They're not going to get it, though, let's be honest. So this week's concise collection features a mischievous minister's menacing, a capricious coat calamity, a treasured treasure trunk, and a mythical meaty meal. Here it all comes. Dear Father Simon and whoever else is clinging to your Sony Award-winning coattails today.
Oh, I say. It was a while ago, but thanks for remembering.
Colin not putting himself in necessarily the best position to get any kind of forgiveness in the studio. My confession goes back over 30 years. Now, there were very few things I had to do as a child. I could usually get out of most things. But one thing I was made to do was the ritual trip to Bromley High Street about once a month. You see, we lived in Orpington, and Bromley is Orpington's big brother. Think of Bromley as Bernie Winters, and Orpington as his much less successful brother Mike. One for the kids there, says Colin. That's helped for a lot of people. One day I was dragged into the huge C&A clothing shop that was once the pride of the high street. I was soon made to try on school trousers, a sweatshirt or two, and the main reason that we came, my brand new ski jacket. Very nice. So all of that in the basket, we then went up to floor 2, ladies' wear. I was bored before the lift door had opened. We wandered around for what felt like hours, but I'm sure in hindsight was probably about 10 minutes, while my mum and Nan looked at dresses and petticoats, I'm guessing, says Colin. I soon spied a lady that looked familiar. I realised that it was the mum of one of my friends. I decided to go and say hello in the hope that my friend was with her. Now, why exactly I decided to choose the method I did to say hello, I've no idea. But I thought it would be funny to hide in the middle of a rotary display of fur coats. I should say before fur is in inverted commas, okay? In the rotary display of fur coats, seeing as she was coming this way, looking at all the fur coats that the shop had. I put my hand in the arm of one of the coats, but thought that looked silly and would not have the desired effect. So I took one of the tomato ketchup sachets that I'd borrowed from the restaurant and I just happened to have in my pocket. And I bit it and I squirted it all over my hand. I lay in wait, and sure enough, she was within striking distance. I raised my ketchup-covered hand and made what I thought looked like a paw shape in the arm of the fur coat. I touched her hand and moaned, help me, please, help me, please help me. I had the whole speech planned, but that was all it took. She shot back and let out the loudest scream I've ever heard. She flew back into a rack of overcoats. She smacked her head on the frame of the display and she was knocked out totally. She lay on the floor and didn't move. I froze. I have actually killed her, I thought, and I'm going to go to prison. What should I do? Well, Father Simon, I did what any self-respecting child would do. I crawled out of the back of the rotary display of fur coats, under the reduced rack of cardigans, and scrambled back to my mum and Nan. By this time, we were looking for the source of the scream and had found the lady. We went for a closer look. I knew I recognised her. On second look, I realised it wasn't my friend's mum who looked like me enough to give me a wagon wheel when I played in her back garden. No, it was in fact a teacher from my primary school. And I never said a word. An ambulance was called, and after a visit to the hospital, she regained consciousness and declared fine, but only after an overnight stay. The irony is I had this teacher in my very next year at school. I have to say she was probably my most favourite teacher ever, in fact, but I obviously never let on that I was the one responsible for putting her in hospital, so much that she missed her own anniversary party that's what she'd been shopping for. She was shopping, she gets knocked out because he's been hiding in the rotary fur display. Father Simon, I need forgiveness, not from the teacher because I feel my constant volunteering to clean the blackboard or go and get the TV on a trolley paid her back many times over because of my fast-developing guilty conscience. I don't seek forgiveness from my mum and Nan, who were so shocked at the sight of the prone shopper that we all went straight home. Woohoo! No, Father Simon, I seek forgiveness from the good folk at C&A that would have had to explain eventually to some poor shopper why their fur coat had what looked like dried blood on one sleeve, but what it was in fact tomato ketchup. I await your mercy, Colin from Orpington in Kent. And remember the difference between Orpington and Bromley, neatly described as the difference between Bernie and Mike Winters. Anyway, Sister Rebecca, what do you say about that? Hiding in a rack of fur coats.
Quite strange behaviour, I
Very
think.
strange.
And it's a very odd way of considering greeting one of your friend's mums.
Yes.
I mean, he thought it was his friend's mum. I mean, how well did he know this mum, really?
Help me.
Yeah, I mean, I would have just gone and said hello, tapped her on the shoulder perhaps. And the worst thing was it was obviously one of his favourite teachers. So I just can't see how a good outcome could possibly have come from what he did. So I'm not going to forgive.
It is, and the more you think about it, a very, very strange way to say, hi, is your son around because we could play? Oh no, I'm going to hide in the fur coats and smear blood on my hand. What do you say, Sister Bobby?
Actions and consequences, eh? What I was going to say is, if he was with like his siblings, if he had them or friends, and they were kind of playing hijinks between them and daring each other, I could kind of understand him more. The very fact that he was so inspired on his own to do this is actually really surprising and quite scary. I think you took it a step too far, and I think you probably knew that at the time, even though you were quite young, you probably knew that actually it was going to scare the living daylights out of her. And said it wasn't like you were all there together and it was a funny joke. She wouldn't have known about it. So actually, in the context of your jinx, it was not properly carried out, so unforgiven.
I don't think we've had CNA referred to for quite a while. In fact,
No.
ever, probably in confessions. So what do you say there, brother?
Well, I was minded to forgive Colin just for the Mike and Bernie Winters reference at the start, which I think was very, very good. However, Colin strikes me as a prankster, and as a prankster is a bit of a menace with his I'm so hilarious, look at me with my tomato ketchup, and as Rebecca points out, what on earth did you think was going to happen, even if this was the mother of your friend, that she was going to go, ha ha ha, oh yes, and my son's over there. Hilarious, Colin, with your hilarious pranks that no one finds funny.
And presumably he'd nicked the ketchup.
Yeah. Did we? I thought he just had it in his
Well, he
pockets.
borrowed it.
Well, it usually comes with the price of a meal. I think you can have a sachet.
Yes.
Can you?
Well done, Bobby.
Think
Yes.
so.
Thank you very much.
No laws contravened in the tomato ketchup thing there. So, but even taking that into account, I'm still not going to forgive.
Here we go with tonight's Drive Time Confession. Gather round. You'll be pleased to know that tonight's one from Tom doesn't insult the collective at the beginning. Thus,
Well,
guaranteeing,
makes a change.
Yes, guaranteeing
Yeah.
that he's not going to get forgiven. Father Simon and the Confessional Collective. That's it. Fine. Good start. I'm writing to unburden myself at about an event that happened many years ago when I was about 5 or 6 years old. As a small child, I loved comics. Not the American superhero type of comics, but proper ones like the Beano, the Dandy, Whizzer and Chips, the Beezer, all those kind of things. One of my granddads contributed to this passion by providing us with a new comic every time we saw him. Much as I enjoyed all of the characters in the comics, I was particularly drawn to the mischievous characters like Beryl the Peril, Minnie the Minx, and of course, Dennis the Menace and Gnasher. In my heart of hearts, I was drawn to their cartoon capers and imagined myself actually to be one of them. I did ask if I could join the Dennis the Menace fan club, but my parents, fearing the worst, refused to let me. On the fateful day in question, my comic-giving granddad and grandma had come to our house to stay whilst we were going away on holiday. They brought comics with them, and I read mine whilst my parents packed the car. So menacing was in my mind. When the time to go arrived, my sister, we'll call her Beth, and I went into the back garden to say goodbye to our goldfish, who lived in a pond, as goldfish tend to. It was usually covered by a layer of green weed and slime. Beth got to the pond first. She bent down to see if she could see any of the goldfish in order to say her au revoir, and I followed along behind. As I approached the pond, I was confronted by the sight of my sister, bent over in front of me, facing the pond.
Oh, no.
And the mischief maker, the Dennis the Menace inside me, took control. I'm going to push you in, I said, somewhat giving it away, but in full menace mode. Don't you dare, shouted Beth, but it was too late. For a few blissful moments, I was starring in my own comic. I placed both my hands on her back. I ignored her new cardigan with stitched flowers on, and I pushed. Yes, I shoved her into the pond. The sense of joy and delight was almost palpable. I don't know if any of your collective have ever pushed a sibling into a pond. Obviously, this is a very, very bad thing to do, and you should never do it.
Don't try this at home.
Exactly. But it was made all the better because Beth emerged from the pond covered in slime and weed. But my elation was cut short by the blood-curdling scream that Beth gave, a shout that brought me back to reality with a bump. Mom! Sorry, I bust the mic. At that moment, I knew I was in trouble that was even deeper than the pond. There was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to hide. I got nowhere to run, baby, nowhere to hide, as Martha Reeves later told us. I couldn't even try the, she said I could, because that was no defence to my actions, like she's going to say she could be pushed in the pond. Mum came running in response to Beth's scream and was confronted by a slime-covered screaming swamp monster and her rather sheepish little brother ready to face the music. Beth was taken into the house to be cleaned up, and I was severely chastised in such a way that sitting in the car for the long journey on our holiday was going to be uncomfortable. Different times, as Matt might say.
Yeah.
The thing is, Father Simon, what made it worse is that Beth had actually swallowed a fish.
Oh, lovely.
When she was pushed in with her mouth open, along with a rather large gulp of sticky pond water, it disappeared. She went back and counted them. Task was quite difficult, made more difficult by the fact the traumatised fish had swum to the bottom of the somewhat opaque pond in order to recover. But it seems we're a fish down. Now, raw fish can be a delicacy, but it wasn't then. An old pond fish, certainly never. So, Father Simon, and this is kind of the punchline, I am now a regional minister in the Baptist Union of Great Britain. And so
excellent.
A significant part of being a Baptist minister is pushing people underwater. So I do wonder whether this event has been formative for me in some way. So now I don't seek forgiveness from my parents or my sister, as I've already paid the penalty for my menacing misdemeanour. I don't even seek forgiveness for traumatising the goldfish, as they will have forgotten about it within a matter of seconds, apart from the unlucky one, I suppose. But I do seek forgiveness from my grandparents who'd come to our house for a quiet break which began in such a traumatic way. In particular from my granddad, who, it has to be said, had a highly developed sense of mischief himself and must have almost done himself a mischief trying not to laugh at what had happened when he saw the screaming, slime-covered swamp monster and heard what I'd done. For to laugh would have vindicated my actions. I throw myself on your mercy, yours slightly less mischievously. Reverend Tom. Didn't mention that at the beginning, but there you go. Fancy that. It's a good pond-based story from the vicar. What do we think, Sister Rebecca?
Well, I think, first of all, there's no excuse that he was reading about Dennis the Menace and therefore, didn't know what he was doing because he felt mischievous and it was the comic's fault. I guess he wasn't really blaming the comic, was he? I think if that had been done to me by my older brother or even my younger brother, had I had one, I would have been so angry and traumatised for life and just angry with my brother for life. So
Really?
I think
Forgive
it's a
and
horrible
forget.
thing.
Move on. It's just a pond.
Just a pond and you swallow a fish. I mean, what are the chances of that? That's amazing. I just think it's a horrible thing to do. And so even though, good has come of it because he's turned into a minister, that's
Yes.
great, I can't forgive.
She might have made it up about the fish now.
She could have done. Very unlikely,
Can't really
really.
prove it. Anyway, let's try the Bobster. What do you say there, Bobby?
Well, sibling rivalry is difficult because had she been a really, 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 really horrible big sister and it was his only final straw that broke the camel's back and he kind of tried to get some power back and got his own back, but he didn't. He was just being naughty for the sake of it. So it seems like he had a really, really, really nice sister who had some really nice clothes on. He was just going to ruin a day. Also with the comic, like you said, he could blame the comic for teaching him, but also the comic also taught you consequences, didn't it, with Dennis the Menace? There was always consequences for his action. So it's a shame that he
Did you always
didn't
get
learn that bit. So he definitely can't blame the comic because there is always a consequence. What I would say as well is I really wanted to know what the penalty was for at home. What did he get into? What did he have to do?
Well, it made the journey slightly uncomfortable,
Got
so I
whacked.
imagine he got whacked, he got the slipper
Oh, I see what you mean.
different
Sorry,
times.
I missed that. Sorry, of course.
In
I'm very
true
sorry.
Beano style.
Do you know what? You had a choice. You didn't have to do it. I think you were trying to be a smart... Yeah, that's the word. Thank you, Rebecca. You are not forgiven.
Brother Matthew.
Number one, I'm not buying that she swallowed the fish. I think she made that up just to make him feel worse. So that's number one. And number two, wasn't it great when the height of rebellion was, I want to join the Dennis the Menace fan club. No, you can't. Don't like the way that's going.
You'll be mixing with the wrong sort.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ruffians.
By the way, you can't watch ITV either. I think the best part of this confession, though, is that he obviously enjoyed it a huge amount, pushing his elder sister into the pond, and thought, wow, that felt great. I wonder if I can get a job doing that. Turns out he can. Get into the Baptists. So I'm going to forgive just for that.
It's a drive time confession. If you have one, on an email, please. confessions@bbc.co.uk. Lots of sibling rivalry yesterday. We're looking for vicars, monks, nuns, and bishops, because we've had some of that. If you miss any, the Confessions podcast, bbc.co.uk/radio 2. This one, if you're feeling a little queasy, might not be for you, but anyway, it's generally fine, broadly speaking. This comes from Oz, Bob and Cliff. It's a threesome. Simon and your collective few. For many months, I've been listening to the Confessions on your show on my daily commute home, and like many of your listeners, have been meaning to rid the guilt that has been playing on my conscience for some time. The year's 1988, and myself and Bob, now fully trained within our diving club, this is Sub-Aqua Club, we're looking to widen our experiences now that we were no longer diving within the confines of our local swimming pool. We were looking to be a little bit more adventurous. Weekends passed as we progressed from the cold waters of Horsey Lake in Portsmouth to the underwater mysteries of the Solent, before branching out to the delights of Dorset and beyond. Our diving trips were varied and kept us amused as we fertled around on the seabed, taking in the scenery or looking for something of value to bring to the surface. It was obvious to myself and Bob that if we were to progress our status within the club, then we should at least find something useful and interesting that would be the subject of discussion in future years at the club bar. A few more dive trips passed, but we weren't doing much to impress our fellow club members with our findings. They didn't seem to be at all interested in our dog's collar, no dog attached, or our collection of broken bottles and various bits of metal and junk that we'd retrieved from the murky depths. Time was running out. It was a few weeks later when myself and Bob were drifting swiftly along the seabed off Old Harry Rocks, which would be quite a good name for a DJ, but anyway, there you go. When things finally changed for the better, or so we thought. There it was, right out in front of us and within striking distance as we drew near. I reached out and I latched onto, unbelievably, a wooden chest with both hands. The rest of my body swung round into the current, with Bob frantically hanging onto my legs. There was no way we were going to let go. Bob's grin said it all. This was treasure at last. After much scrambling around what seemed like an eternity under the water, we emerged from the cloudy murk into the bright light of day, where we were eagerly greeted by two of our gesturing crew. "What have we got there, boys? Sunken treasure?" Sorry, there's a little bit of a pirate voice for no reason. We eagerly clambered aboard with our catch, with diving kit being hastily discarded and scattered in all directions. What had been an orderly boat and crew had now diminished into a scene of chaos, with equipment and belongings all over the deck. The excitement was too much for Bob, who took out his large diver's knife and began to prise at the chest lid with all his might. Feeling nervous? It was at this point that two interesting and unexpected events were to unfold. The first of these was a large cracking noise as Bob's knife twisted into the chest and sent a large jet of black gunge into the air and then into the boat, covering much of the equipment and dive kit that was scattered all over the deck. This was immediately followed by the second thing, a rather surprised voice saying, "Has anyone seen there's a large brass plaque on the top of the chest? It's got writing on it. Anyone seen that?" Bob's knife scratched at the brass to clean away the barnacles and years of marine fouling to reveal some additional wording. The third and most telling event followed as we heard those fateful words of our skipper, who recited, "It says, here lies the earthly remains of John de Burrion, deceased 1901, blah, 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 blah." We all looked at each other as the realisation of what we had found sunk in. It was one of those slow-motion moments, Father Simon. Bob picked up the chest and placed it back in the sea. We watched on as we saw the chest disappear down to the deep, with a black plume spreading out from behind. Silence followed, but was quickly broken by the shouts of our fellow divers as they broke the surface excitedly. "Did anyone just see that? Did anyone see that? I saw a dark object flying past my head with black ink coming out from the back. That was an octopus. That was definitely an octopus. Yes, it was." And so, Simon, this is the moment that we ask for forgiveness from you and your collective for what took place on this eventful day. We ask for forgiveness from Mr. de Burrion. By the way, we've changed the name of the dead person.
Really?
Yes.
Just in case.
Just in
well
case,
done, the lawyers.
even though it's 1901.
Yeah.
We asked for forgiveness from Mr. Debarian, who was raised from the deep, then misidentified as an octopus on his return journey to the bottom of the sea. Yours in hope of forgiveness, Oz, Bob and Cliff. Some pretty myopic divers going on there, confusing an oblong wooden box for a multi-tentacled fish. Anyway, you kind of sense that there was something bad about to happen. Otherwise, they wouldn't have written in. Sister Rebecca.
Yeah, so it was a funeral at sea, and they brought it up. I mean, was it a coffin or just a box? We
I
don't
have-
know,
I
I guess.
have
I'm
the- I
assuming
just
if it was a
have-
coffin, they would have probably realised before they opened it that something wasn't
think?
quite right, yeah. You would have thought, wouldn't you, that they're a bit more, I don't know, careful. 'Cause
They
if
were
it-
greedy.
If
They
it
were
had
greedy.
been sort of treasure, is the right thing to do to be sticking a knife into the box? And, I mean, if it was sort of ancient treasure, shouldn't you bring it to a museum or something like that? I don't know. I would have thought, but maybe not. Maybe that's not what the rules say. I think the fact that he used the word "furtled" means I'm going to forgive, actually, because I like that word.
It is a very good word, isn't it?
It is. I'm not entirely sure what it means.
Furtling around on the seabed. What? Sister Bobby.
All that glitters is not gold, is it, really? I mean, it's not your fault that you found it. It's one of those things. It was a complete accident and mistake. And maybe you should have
It's
just worked
110 years ago,
Yeah,
whatever.
so it's not obvious. There is a box, and obviously it wasn't obvious. It's covered in barnacles, It's just that kind of learning curve for later on. And actually, what I think you're doing is it seems that you're doing a really, really, really good job of cleaning the debris off the seabed. So you're forgiven because you're doing a better job of that, of clearing the rubbish, than you are of finding anything of
All
value.
right, so it's an eco thing you're
Yep.
going for. All right, okay. Brother Matthew.
I am minded to forgive here because when the only time I've ever done that sub-aqua thing, I couldn't hack it because my brain the entire time was doing the Jaws theme, and I had to come up straight away because I couldn't.
Where were you doing this?
Well, this was in New Zealand, and it was obviously, everything was wonderful, but I couldn't get that theme tune out of my head, and then I had to come. It's a bit like going to the dentist, and I can't get Marathon Man out of my head, and I panic. So for being down there in the first place and not thinking of the Jaws theme, I am going to forgive just for that. And which of us, if we'd come across a chest full of treasure, would not have tried to, jimmy it open and think our money worries were over? So,
All right.
forgiven.
BBC Radio 2, another drive time confession. If you have one, you send it to confessions@bbc.co.uk. If you miss any, the Confessions podcast is available every Friday. You can download all the terrible tales of the week. Thank you very much indeed for sending yours in. This is from Bob. Thank you, Bob. Well, it could be from Nancy, but we're calling you Bob. Father Simon, the year is 2005, and my wife Sue and I were living with our two sons, Rory, who's 9, and Tim, who's 6. I'm sure we've changed all of these.
Yes, good.
But you never know.
Get the lawyers involved.
On
Yeah.
Hampshire's south coast, as opposed to Hampshire's north coast. The story starts on the last Friday of the summer holidays. We'd been out for the day and we were driving home discussing what to have for dinner. And to be honest, neither of us really wanted or could be bothered with the hassle of cooking, so we decided we'd stop off in the centre of town and pick up something to take home. We parked near to the local fish and chip shop at around 6 o'clock, and not surprisingly, what with it being a Friday and everything, there was a huge long queue. I then pointed to the less busy kebab shop a couple of doors down and said, if you don't want to queue for fish and chips, we could always grab a kebab. Well, the boys had never had a kebab before, so I tried to educate them about the various choices that a kebab shop had to offer. I explained that there were skewers, or shish, and sausages, different meats, lamb and chicken, and I then pointed to the large cylinder of slowly turning meat in the shop window and said, or you could try an elephant's leg. So we're at the nub of it. Well, their little faces beamed and their eyes lit up in unison. They said, yes, we would love elephant's leg, please, Dad. Can we really have elephant's leg? Certainly, I say, Mum. That's what they had for dinner. Elephant's leg, or to be more precise, a small doner kebab each with ketchup and chips. No chilli sauce or pickle, of course, and they went to bed happy and suitably full without the slightest hint of post-kebab or pachyderm remorse. The following Monday, it's the first day of term, the boys are back at school and I was back at work on an early shift, and I receive a text from my wife asking me to stop off on the way home at Tim's school to see his teacher, as there had been an incident. I had no idea what it was, but I arrived at school about 3:15 in time to meet his teacher, but was taken to the headmaster's office, where a red-eyed and clearly angry Tim was waiting with his teacher, Mrs. Tweeden-Brogues, who had returned to the school after her summer break and had had a 100% successful humour bypass. Mrs. Tweeden-Brogues then proceeded to explain what had happened. As it was the first day of term, the children were still understandably excited and buzzing with the events from the holidays. So they were each asked to tell the rest of the class about something that they'd done during the summer. It was the usual tales of days on the beach, building sandcastles and sailing trips across the Solent, that kind of thing. All the normal summer activities, including one little girl who told the story of how she'd been to Marwell Zoo and she'd seen lions and zebras and elephants. And it was at this point that Tim proudly announced to his classmates that he'd eaten one. Well, there was much laughter, which only caused Tim to forcefully restate his claim with some vigour that he had indeed eaten an elephant. A rather heated and emotional debate then ensued, resulting in the little girl being in floods of tears because she'd rather liked the elephant at Marwell Zoo and was now convinced that Tim had eaten that one in particular. Tim ended up in tears after a shouting match with his teacher, who had tried at first to cajole and then in the end emphatically tell him that he'd not eaten an elephant. Tim was outraged because his dad had told him it was elephant meat. His dad never lied and his teacher was clearly stupid, and he told her as much.
Oh dear.
Bob says he gets his temper from his mother. Obviously, I did what any responsible parent would do in this situation. I told Tim he'd been silly and made him apologise to his teacher. This did not go down well, and he didn't speak to me for the rest of the week. His faith in me was shattered, understandably so in retrospect. So forgiveness from my younger son, Tim, for letting him think that he'd eaten an elephant's leg and not explaining to him that actually it was just a joke. His headmaster or his humorless teacher that it was a joke from the young girl in his class who got very upset because she thought that my son had eaten the elephant that she'd seen at Marwell Zoo. It was just an unfortunate misunderstanding. But it was quite funny. Thank you very much indeed, Bob, for tonight's tale about the elephant's leg. And nicely timed. We've got lots of food coming in. It's a Foodie Thursday. We worked it out. It's called production, actually. That's what it is. Rebecca's going first. Rebecca,
I think Bob is funny. It
Yes.
does look like an elephant's leg, and that's a funny way of looking at it. However, unlike Matt, I don't agree with lying to your children because it can lead to complications like that.
Like this one.
And the worst thing is that he blamed Tim in front of his teacher. He should have just said, "Oh well, I was just joshing
He absolutely
around."
should. He should have said
Absolutely.
it was my fault.
Yeah.
We did this joke about the elephant's leg,
Exactly.
and he passes the
So
blame on his
even
kids.
though I like the sound of Bob, I'm sorry I can't forgive you because of that.
Yeah, well, I think Rebecca's got onto something there. What do you think, Novice?
You know, I think maybe you could actually have amputated the leg and not kill the elephant in the process, but he didn't explain that. So in this case, the elephant, but I think we were referring to, yeah, Bob, you made a right Horlicks of it. It's a bit unfortunate, but the next day the elephant did come up in class, the likelihood of that. But there again, he should have told his children before they went off to school that morning, Rory and Tim, that no, they hadn't actually been eating elephant. He made a dog's dinner of it, not literally on this occasion. So remarkably, I'm not going to forgive you,
Not
Bob.
going to forgive. Well, I think you're both right, and there is that point that actually he should have said, "It was my mistake, teacher and head teacher." Brother
Yes,
Matthew.
but where's the fun in that? No fun at all. I mean, obviously, as Rebecca's pointed out, there are repercussions to lying to your children, and a reasonable person would therefore recant their belief that you should always lie to your kids. But I believe it's far too much fun lying to your children, and then particularly when you have something like this happen, and it sounds like hilarious events in the classroom. So, and good for him for sticking to his guns, and everyone was apologised to who needed to be apologised to. So no harm done, and yes, full steam ahead. Well done.
Well, they were this week's confessions, and they were pretty good in places. What did you think, and have you got one? You know you want to. On an email, confessions@bbc.co.uk. More Baddens in a week, and if you missed our superb guests, that's Ian Rankin on Monday, Nigel Slater on Tuesday, Gillian Flynn on Wednesday, and Jeff Lynn on Thursday, before his big in-concert for Joe. Go to the iPlayer and enjoy these delights at your leisure. Thank you so much.